Well, thank you, Art, for spending the time with us and talk to my students. Can you see Can you see them in the room?
Yes, I can. Hello, everybody.
Great. Would you like to kind of go ahead and do a self-introduction, and then if you like to ask students to introduce themselves before you get started?
Yes. I would like to hear from each person a little brief thumbnail about their background in social media and industry, if any. And my own experience spans more than a decade implementing social media for learning and other reasons in industry in 3 different companies. So that's my background. My perspective is that of a learning professional. I've been using social media for learning for the most part in all 3 companies, and found it very successful in some cases and not in others, which I'll address, and share some case studies from my experience at Motorola, which I think you'll find interesting. Okay, whoever's first, go ahead.
Why don't we just start from right here?
Okay.
And then we circle around the room.
All right. Well, my name is Marilla Sorenso.
Raise your hand first.
Yes, my name is Marilla Sorenso. I am a student here, of course, part-time in the HRD program. I work full-time for the university in the university housing department. So my experience with social media is actually extensive to a fact that I'm always on it. If students need to reach me or something like that, that's usually the way they like to do it. And also by just creating events and publicizing events and other professional development opportunities for people in my department.
Interesting. Thank you.
No problem.
My name is Megan Schultz, and I'm an HRD master's student here. In terms of social media, I've used it just for personal use. I've never really used it in the business sense.
Well, that's interesting because most businesses have shared your reluctance to do anything in the public media, social media space, and many of them have invented their own versions of things that they can control internally, and I'll cover how that's done.
Hi, can you hear me? I'm like way back here.
Yes, I can even see you.
Oh.
Hi there.
I work for Sites Classroom Technologies here on campus. And so we work a lot with students and professors who use any equipment in any IT classroom. So we do a lot of social media with Twitter. We do a lot of blog posting about events that we're doing or seminars or what's going on in the classroom. We don't have a Facebook right now, but we're actually, one of the students wants to create one. So right now they're all student run. We just make sure they're not posting anything crazy on there, but they pretty much do all of the social media for us.
Terrific. Thank you.
My name is Taylor Tian, and then I'm a first year HRD PhD student here also. And then I'm from China, and then I'm pretty, because I live on the internet, but most of my use is also for personal uses. So I'm pretty active on Facebook and then microblog and then other types of social media because I need to connect with my friends and family.
Well, thank you. I've done a lot of work in China, mainly in the Beijing, Tianjin area, and I can share some cultural perspectives on social media use that we discovered when we were working with it there as well.
Okay.
So be interested in your perspective.
So maybe you just start with Ashley and then
start with me.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Allison Bell. I am a doctoral student here, and I've also worked in a lot of different contexts over my career, and my experience with it in a workplace setting has been more on the consumer side of it. You talked about some of those behind the firewall applications, and I've sort of been a consumer of that, not on the implementation side. So I'm really curious to get your insight on some of the challenges and opportunities you've had in your experience with implementing it and using it, especially for learning and knowledge sharing.
Well, thank you. And I can also share a little bit of information about how Motorola used Yammer for an external-facing social media connection to customers and their experience there. First of all, their deep-seated fears about doing that, and then later what they discovered. Thank you.
Can you see me? Yeah.
Hands. Yes.
Hi, I'm Karen Seok. I'm from South Korea. I'm a second-year PhD student in human resource development. And personally, I use a lot of technical things like iPad. I have iPad, Mac, and also iPhone. I use a lot. Also connect to my family, friends. But I also work for the Career Center at the University of Illinois. So I'm working with the international students. So I'm very interested in LinkedIn because LinkedIn is kind of for international students the best way to build their network in the United States. So I'm actually have a big group for international students in U of I. So we try to connect between students and alumni. So I'm interested in your perspective of LinkedIn as a professional in company. And another thing I'm very curious is that seniors, using the social media because I'm teaching my mother to learn a lot of technical things because she's studying her PhD in Korea. So, but it's very hard for her to accept a lot of things. So I'm just wondering because in company a lot of executives they're older than normal employees. So I really wonder their perspective of social media.
Yeah, I'd be happy to address that. I've also worked in Seoul and Busan in Korea. I'm familiar with the culture there. I congratulate your mother on her approach to using social media. That's a big step and very exciting.
Okay, my name is Amir. You can see me. I'm also a PhD student here in UOI, and my usage of social network is mostly on Facebook, but personal usage and also LinkedIn, but very recent. So, but I've been there for like quite a long time. I think the first time that Facebook was there, but I didn't use it for any business or any organizational settings.
I understand. For those of you interested in LinkedIn from a commercial or a company perspective, one of the things I learned recently from people exploiting LinkedIn for job searches, in talking with HR professionals in various companies, I learned that 80 to 85% of recruiters or HR people managing recruitment of employees to companies use social media, in particular LinkedIn and Twitter. And the other startling piece of it is that 50% of them only use LinkedIn and Twitter. So if you're in a HR function in a corporation, for example, you may find that people aren't using any of the older or more traditional recruiting approaches. They're all going online. And of course, the question that was asked was, who do you think these people are actually looking for if they're only using social media for recruiting? Do you have thoughts on that? What they might be actually doing?
As well, like PhD candidate in HRD, I don't have any experience in social media particularly, but I am involved in use of technology at workplace. I'm working for the last 3 years in technical service at University Library.
Right. Well, the correct answer is that these recruiters are looking for people who are adept with modern technology, and their thought is the best way to do that would be to only recruit using social media. So that people who are adept with social media and up on current technology and trends would probably be the best people to bring into the company. So that was somewhat startling to people my age who are digital immigrants and not digital natives. And quite an interesting change in recruiting and sourcing functions.
Well, we have one more student, and then we have 2 special guests.
Oh, marvelous.
My name is Mohammed Nabi, and I'm a PhD student here. And as per social media thing, LinkedIn is my next thing to do. I'm really lagging behind on all these social media things. And I'm planning to get a specific training on LinkedIn with how to set up how to manage your profile and how to really improve all of your presence.
Thank you.
And we have a special guest in here.
I think Art is the special guest, right?
It's a special speaker.
Special speaker, yeah. My name is Peter Kuchinka. I'm not registered in Jessica's class, but I probably should be. I'm a professor in the department. I teach in the area of organizational change and development and international HRD. And I'm a late adopter to social media. What got me roped into is the extensive use that our online students are making of social media to build the community they don't have in the classroom.
Yes.
To create that sense of belonging and community, and I was really impressed. And more recently, the department has an initiative to link our current students with the alums and prospective students through Facebook and LinkedIn, and I think we've managed to keep quite an active presence there to build community and connect people for a variety of reasons.
I understand. Thank you for that. There was one question that was submitted early about how virtual learning you might implement it, and I can talk specifically about that as well.
And then we have another special guest.
Hi, my name is Grace, so I'm an assistant professor in the department. My background is learning technology, so with regard to social media,
sorry, but it's very hard to hear you wherever you're located. Oh, okay, I see the hand. Okay.
Grace O, an assistant professor in the department. My background is learning technologies. So
yes.
With regard to social media, I'm kind of interested in how social media is perhaps used at workplace in terms of to promote people's learning, collaboration, and establishment of community of practice.
Well, I think I can help you. One of the things that I'll talk about today are probably they're probably a rare commodity in the conversation. I have two case studies for implementation of social media for learning that demonstrate business impact in real business metrics, real business numbers. And there's a lot of conversation these days and in the past about social media and how good it will be and what it might do and might do that, might do this. But there really isn't enough in the conversation about actual business change or impacts moderated or mediated by social media. So I'll talk about that, and you'll have the slides, and you can take that and use it however you like.
Yeah. All right, we have the slides up, and everybody should also have a hard copy of the slides. So yeah, whenever you can, you're ready, you can get started.
Okay, as I shared, my framework, the place I'm coming from to the presentation, is that of a learning professional in various industries and in that space for multiple decades. So I've seen a lot of change and a lot of use of various learning technologies during that period, each of which had some pluses and some minuses in the learning space, and I'll be happy to talk about those. So let me share first my perspective on what's happening in learning in the industrial space, and to, after that, stop and see if you have any questions about that particular perspective. So first of all, this is what I think our challenges are. Most people in industry really don't like extensive e-learning. They don't come to long classroom programs anymore, and our next workforce looks like this, and guess what? They're already digitally literate, so they're not going to go to your 3-day class or your 4-hour e-learning. They also don't care about a learning management system. They're not going to hunt through your learning management system in your company for a course of any kind. In fact, if they have a problem, where are they going to go?
Google.
Any ideas? What do you think of?
Google.
If I ask you where the employees are going to go, what are they going to go to get an answer to a problem?
Google.
Yeah, Google. Where else?
Social media.
You'll have to speak up. I'm having trouble hearing.
Their Facebook.
Yeah, Facebook. How about YouTube?
Yeah.
Anybody look for a YouTube video on how to fix their car recently? No. And what about their friends? They're going to call their friends. So this whole idea that we're going to hide solutions to problems or hide knowledge in a course binder in a learning management system is old technology and is not going to be very appealing to new employees in the workplace. And guess what? If you're in an HRD function and you have responsibility for training or learning and development in the industry, or you have key partners who are, one of the key pieces that was talked about was that training is not an attractor for people coming to companies anymore. Any thoughts on why that might be? How has training as an attractor changed in companies in the last few years? What have you studied? What do you know?
They can learn from YouTube and other things from online, so what's the one of reason they think training is not attractor, and they need their own customized needs to learn. So if they go to training within the industry, maybe they kind of general things they learn, so might be something they're not interested in. So.
Yeah, that's true. We have such a diversity of people and populations in industry now, it's very difficult to make a one-size-fits-all training. That's true. Another change in organizations is that they've told employees who is responsible for their learning and development now.
They are.
Who's responsible for that?
The person.
Yeah, they are. There's nobody in the company that's going to come to them and tell them what they need to learn. And so people coming into companies realize that's gone. It's not going to be there anymore. And so training used to be the #2 attractor in this survey. And it's now changed that the top 2 attractors for people coming to industry are high-quality colleagues and high-quality projects. So why might that be? Who are they going to learn from?
They're going to learn from their peers as they're working on these exciting projects.
Exactly right. And the exciting projects will offer them development in the skills they need. Does that mean they're going to stick around very long?
No.
No, not at all. The reason that's really true is I did some work with the National Academy of Engineering, and they have done many studies on engineering populations worldwide and the half-life of knowledge from people who graduated from universities like you're about to do. And they found that the half-life of engineering knowledge in a high-technology industry is under 2 years. So that means that somebody who graduates and comes into your organization and is there 2 years, half of what they learned is no longer relevant in that industry. And if they stay 4 years, they're down to 25%. So they are going to realize that, and they're going to go to the next industry that has challenging colleagues and challenging projects, unless there is some way for them to keep up within that company or in that industry. And I'll make the case that social media might offer one avenue. What questions do you have at this point? Okay? This is an interesting graph. I'll have to explain this. This was a study done by Deloitte in about 2010. And you'll notice that there are 2 colors of bars on this graph. The brown ones are vertical, the blue ones are mostly below the line. Basically, this chart says from 1970 to 2010, the brown bars show the growth of the available workforce in those countries, meaning that the workforce population was increasing. The blue bars show the change in the available workforce from 2010 to 2000, I can't see it, 2040 perhaps. And what that means is all of the developed countries, with only 5 exceptions, are going to show as much as a net change of 50% negative in the available workforce. So for companies that are trying to grow or expand or diversify, that's kind of a problem, isn't it, on a national level? Moreover, the blue bars for countries like Brazil and Mexico are mostly birth rate in those countries. And for places like the US and Australia, the blue bar increases there are immigration. We're famous for our H-1B visas and that sort of thing. So social media is going to be very important for keeping available workforce engaged in the company, even if they're not at the facility and even if they may be past retirement or consulting. Thought you might appreciate a Dilbert cartoon. If you're not familiar with Dilbert, this is a comic strip in the US that takes an interesting view of the culture and relationships in industry. Anybody experienced this particular situation? So if it means that you already have to come into the job knowing everything you have to know, how might social media help you with that, both before you come into the company and after you're there? Any thoughts on that? It is okay if you talk on Skype. It'll be okay with me.
From a very simple perspective, just following what's going on, trends from either the organization you're maybe seeking to join, what are they talking about, what kind of conversations or projects are they having? And
sure.
That's kind of a straightforward way to get a preview, if you will, of what that organization is concerned about.
Yeah, and some of you have talked about LinkedIn. I suppose you know that you can follow companies and you can find people who are employed in companies just by using LinkedIn, and you can converse with them. You can set up meetings and contacts. You can have them tell you their perspective of the company, what's going on, before you ever even apply for a job there. I had the wonderful experience of being Googled by an employee or a person I was trying to hire as an employee before the interview. And she told me she'd Googled me before she came to the interview. A very wise choice, I think. So there's things like that that people can do using social media that make a big difference. Okay, here's another reason why social media might pay for itself. In this particular situation, the International Data Group does a lot of research inside companies, and they found that these are the costs for people who spend time hunting for information. These are people who haven't gone to YouTube or Facebook or called their friends. If they're spending time just looking for a solution at their rate of pay, fully loaded, the time they spend, that's a large cost. If you multiply that by 100 people or 1,000 people in a larger company, pretty soon you're talking real money. Okay, so let me start off by talking to you about how social media got started in a large multinational technology company. This is Motorola. And it's kind of an interesting story. In Motorola, there was a document repository tool called OpenText. Inside Motorola, it was called Compass. And in any companies you'll work with, there will be some kind of tool like this. And people might have used Microsoft SharePoint, for example, or they might use OpenText or other kinds of repositories. Well, back in the mid-2000s, the company decided social media was becoming important, and so they added social media tools to the document repository. So Motorola, being one of the initial implementers of OpenText, happily decided to be a beta test site for these social media tools, and they implemented them. But IT wanted to make sure these new tools would play nicely with the other children in the sandbox, and so they didn't tell anybody about them for 18 months. And so I had a couple of people come from one of the business units to meet with us in the learning function, and they said, are you using these new knowledge management tools and social media tools? I said, what are you talking about? And they said, well, these things that have been implemented. So when we found out what they were, we formed a group to assist people in using the tools and provide learning on how to use these tools. And we talked to the IT people about, how's this tool being used since it's been around for 18 months? And they said, we don't really know. And I said, well, can you run some kind of report? And they said, sure. And about 2 months later, they came back with a report that said there were 2,424 knowledge communities in Motorola. Needless to say, we were quite surprised. This is a huge grassroots implementation of something that was never supported with announcements, communication, learning. People discovered it and then started using it for things. We found out through further research that not all of those implementations were still active. Clearly, a lot of people had tried it out and decided not to use it. But the active communities were each contacted, their leaders were spoken to or contacted to find out how they were using it, what their mission or their approach was, and specifically what they were using it for. And we found usages across the spectrum. Some examples would be that the Human Resources Group in Europe, for example, had a closed knowledge community group that was used for HR strategy in EMEA. And we had engineering product groups that, because the social media tools and the knowledge management tools could create role-based access, not just name-based access, they could create a role for contractors and allow contractors on a design project for a new product to only have access to the information and technologies for the part of the new product they were working on, and they were not able to see any of the other work that others had done. This might seem counterintuitive if you're having a group design a product, but when you're using contractors in several parts of the world, your risks for losing your design outside of the engineering function are very large. And these social media tool features enable contractors to continue to contribute without having access to the entire design. So these are some examples of how people just happened to use these tools when they came across them. When we showed how many people were using the tools and what they could be used for, we thought that there might be some additional work that could be done to add social media functions so they could communicate more readily. IT provided the pathway for senior managers to try out these tools and to announce on the main employee portal, which is what's being shown right now, that they were using it and that they encouraged employees to use it. So let's see what some of them did. First of all, I want to talk a bit about knowledge communities of any type on any tool. And this is any type of social media group. You have LinkedIn groups, you have Google groups, you have knowledge community tool groups. And in this particular case, what we discovered was there are at least two types of communities. One that we'll call Phase 1 and the other one we'll call Phase 2. A Phase 1 community is described as a cafeteria-style community. Someone creates a community, group puts information in the community, and people and take that information and they go use it somewhere. They contribute, no ongoing conversation. These people sit for a week on the information in the community, and then they die or about 6 months is average. And this leads to a lot of community startups, but inactive communities later on. A Phase 2 community is somewhat different. These communities are working on a continuous or ongoing strategic goal. They participate and collaborate on continuous inquiry in the space. And these type of communities have many years of life. Some, once they were started, are still going in the industry they're in. An example might be, let's just say for a moment we're talking about office productivity tools. So we make a Phase 1 community about Microsoft PowerPoint. And so people come to that community and they find out how to use PowerPoint, and once they know, there's no reason to come back because that's all the information in that community. But what if we chartered that community to continually investigate office productivity tools? And that community of experts would continue to research, analyze, promote, implement office productivity tools on a continuous basis. That community would then attract senior management interests, certainly in IT, maybe elsewhere, of being the type of community that continuously offers a business benefit. So I'd like you to keep Phase 1 and Phase 2 communities in mind.
Can I ask?
Yes, question?
Because as for my one homework of the class, I did some research of a community of practice. especially I'm interested in diversity perspective. So I found one article talking about community of practice with diversity perspective. So the researchers did some research about with the Fortune 100 company. That company has like a multinational company like a Motorola. So they're doing very active sharing their knowledge, especially between China and United States. So they found a very great advantage. But I'm very interested in like because of maybe language barrier and different cultural perspective, Asian employees they are not they cannot use that actively because they cannot post it in English that much. They're kind of shy to say something wrong, and because of language barrier, they cannot understand clearly. Also, they are not sure those types of knowledge is reliable because it's just sharing between employees. So, but U.S. employees, they are saying it's very creative. Even though it's different perspective, they think it's a very good way to learn another perspective. So even though they're in the same situation, the perspective is totally different. So I think the more like also those kind of things happen. So I just want to know in more like situation.
Yes, I support and I agree with what you contributed. The cultural differences can be roadblocks to real collaboration using social media. And spoken language is clearly one of them. I know I'm a lot more comfortable reading information in other languages than I am trying to speak it or hear it correctly. And what we found was the knowledge communities where information was posted, if it was only in English and people were somewhat bilingual in the written word, that was one way in which people could collaborate without having to try and understand the spoken language, which is the most difficult part. In addition, we found that our groups in China that were using community-based approaches tended to form sub-communities where they would work on things together in their language and then would post the results of that to the central community or the higher level community. And they were more comfortable doing this for cultural reasons. I worked in Asia for several decades, and I understand that a group approach to problem solving and results is much preferred and often produces a better result. And so we have these cultural approaches designed into how contributions are made. And I'll show one about an engineering symposium approach that leveraged that approach. I also spent some time in China, in Beijing, and talking with people about the topic of blogging. And it was interesting to me that they recognized a difference, a personal difference in how people did blogs in the US versus how people wrote blogs in China. And there's a nuance here that's important for those of you in HR who will work with global populations. The perspective was that in the US, the blog postings were about a personal idea or personal perspective, personal opinion. And people in China who were blogging were not blogging about themselves, they were blogging about something they had experienced or seen in China and posting that on a blog. Now that's a very subtle difference for you to consider, that the blog postings from people in China were not about them, they were about something they had experienced as if it were a factual occurrence or something that other people would see the same way, versus an American blogger who would only post their individual perspective or opinion about something and not what everybody would see or experience. And I thought that was a critical difference between American culture, for example, and Asian cultures, perhaps in general, maybe only for China, and other places around the world where people work in a more communal sense and where the personal opinion is not as valuable as the collective opinion. So in HR frameworks, framing messages and helping people in communities or in social media understand that and work with each other that way is a very important piece. Thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Motorola, like many other companies early in the social
There's
media.
another question.
Oh yes, go ahead.
I want to know that how you overcome the shyness of the people to participate in these communities.
Yes, this is a very big problem. And what we experienced was we found that people were not contributing because they were worried about being flamed, which is an American phrase for having people respond negatively to what they posted. A lot of people were reluctant to contribute because they realized how they might express opinions would not be interpreted correctly. And so I'll talk a little bit about how community leaders change their approach to new members in a community to correct for that. Basically, the right way to do it is that people in the community and community leaders need to ensure that responses to members of the community and to new members in the community value their contribution initially, expand on it or build on it, and suggest additional contributions would be valuable. This opens the door for people who may be shy or reluctant to contribute for a variety of reasons to be part of the community, that they realize they're welcomed in and should be a part of the community. We called this concept the zero-depth, come-as-you-are pool party. When summer returns to Illinois, you might experience some of this, where this concept meant that you could enter into the community or the pool with no barriers. A zero-depth pool means you don't have to go down steps or do anything special, you just walk in. And zero depth meant also that if you didn't like the community, you just simply walked back out and there were no barriers to leaving. And a pool party means you come as you are. You don't have to be special, you don't have to be dressed up any particular way. You just come as you are. And so we thought that approach to setting up communities and educating community leaders made it much easier for people who might be reluctant to come in and explore and be welcomed and join the community. Does that help? Okay. So Motorola as a company was reluctant to just simply implement Twitter inside the company and make it available inside the company. And so IT and legal and HR and a number of people were arguing about this for months. And a couple of people in the mobile devices division of Motorola got tired of waiting for them to make a decision, so over a weekend they wrote an internal Twitter application called MotMot. And of course I really liked this because this was a 240-character internal Twitter, and as an ex-academic, Jessica will tell you we can't say anything in 124 characters, so this was a much better tool. What was interesting about this was you could see down the right there were a number of resources to support people using this particular tool. And there were instructions and helpful hints on the page and a number of other resources to help people. Also, there were groups. If you see down right above public timeline, there's a tab for groups. You could establish a group in this internal Twitter, just like you can in Twitter or LinkedIn. And you could form a group for engineering, for HR, for marketing and sales, whatever you wanted. So this tool rapidly was adopted by employees as a way to collaborate with and communicate with people like them who weren't co-located with them. This particular slide shows the number of people 90 days after this tool was implemented and the number of tweets they sent on a single day. Now, where these are located is somewhat interesting. I have a cultural perspective to share about South America, in particular Brazil. The reason so few people used this Twitter is that in their culture in Brazil, if something's really important, you come and meet face to face. My story about that is I tried to work with an R&D director down there for many months via email or telephone, and I was rebuffed. And I finally reached him by telephone late one day, and he told me, if it's really important, you'll come down here and meet with me. And he hung up the phone. So I realized that the only way I was going to get to work with this fellow would be to come down to Brazil. And that's a glimmer of cultures that exist in other places besides Brazil. where social media would not be considered because the face-to-face personal relationship is primary. What we did find out is when costs or travel bans or other things were in place and the face-to-face relationship was not possible, then these people might choose to use social media to have an interaction or a connection with someone that they couldn't have otherwise. In addition to the internal Twitter, the HR organization was primary in setting up something called PeopleNet. And this was basically an internal Motorola Facebook. It has lots of the same features of Facebook. You can see there are lots of information in there, my location, my colleagues, my current projects, my interests, my department I'm in, all the kinds of things that are available on typical HR systems, and all on one page for one person. And this particular approach has been leveraged by many more companies since Motorola did it. Baxter, where I am now, has a new version of this that they use. And then, of course, there was something called M2. You were waiting for this one, right? Again, for security and company reasons, they didn't put in place YouTube. You could still get to it through the internet. But for inside video clips of things relevant to the company and its various divisions, again, this was an application written by a couple of engineers over a few days and implemented without IT and legal knowing about it within one of the business divisions. And it became so instantly popular that they simply let it stay and leveraged it across the corporation. So if your organization that you're in is not populated with people from the Rebel Alliance, you may have to do this a different way, but these types of internal social media tools are rapidly snapped up by people who see their value and leverage them. For this particular application, the people that leveraged it first were sales and marketing people who had gone to trade shows, and they didn't have a really good way to share what they learned in those trade shows back with the employee base in the company, particularly in other sales and marketing divisions or the business operations group or R&D even. And so they began posting these short video clips of what they'd learned about competitors, customers, other technologies, and since these were public and available to anybody in Motorola, they became instant celebrities. Following that, senior leaders found that this was a much more effective way of getting information out to employees than holding the quarterly town hall, where half the people didn't come anyway because they were busy. So they would record these and put them up there, and you could go at any time and hear what the senior leaders were thinking that week, that month, and you wouldn't have to wait 3 months to find out. And so this became a valuable tool for senior leadership about key messages that they wanted to get to the population using a social media tool. And this tended to keep the organization up to speed on what the senior leader's vision was and what was going on to support it. And this turned out to be one of the primary tools they used for communication. In fact, it was quite comical. The administrative assistants for these leaders would send regular communications each quarter saying, "We're not having a quarterly town hall anymore. You have to go to the MTube site and listen to the senior leader talk about what's going on in the organization." So there was a transition and change period where they had to sort of nudge people in this direction. All right. Again, this was from March 2010. Again, 90 days after these tools were put in place. I'd like you to take a moment to look at the population of Motorola at that time, and then scan over to things like blog entries, FAQs, forum topic replies, to see that this was a pretty sizable uptake of this social media tool over a very short period of time. And like in your organizations, people don't go after using another tool because they're busy. Who needs somewhere else to go or something else to do, right? So this was taken up by busy people because it had a business value for them. And that's an important point to keep and to share with people you're talking to about implementing social media. Okay, I'll stop here for questions. What questions do you have at this point?
Art, back to your slide. This is Peter Kuchinka. I don't know.
Yes, Peter.
I'm off the side here. Back to your slide on users by region.
Yes.
From the perspective of a global knowledge sharing approach and east-west and north-south, somewhat equal participation, this slide would worry me.
Yes.
Because it seems to reinforce a somewhat ethnocentric approach to knowledge sharing and participation and potentially rob the organization of input from other parts of the world.
Yeah, I see it a little differently. One of the things that we looked into and discovered we were right about was it took longer for managers in business locations outside to understand and finally agree that use of social media was of business value and it was not wasting time. Not that U.S. managers are any better at this, but they had more opportunity to come up to speed on it in a period of time. But as it was rolled out internationally, there wasn't a lot of information that went out to managers outside the United States. And their views, for a variety of reasons, are much less risk-taking than people in the U.S., particularly in a U.S.-based company. And so they just basically shut it down until they learned more about it or until their employees talked about the value they'd had with it. And so this 90-day period was actually a fairly short period. And so after this, you saw the usage grow in each of these regional areas beyond this. But as you point out, for cultural reasons, not as large a population uptake as you might have expected in the U.S. Also, if you total up the numbers here, they do essentially equate to the U.S. numbers. And at this time, Motorola's employee population was about 50-50. So for that reason alone, we think it was fairly close after 90 days, but we did find managers were not as accepting of social media use for some time after this.
Was this then a parallel system that existed along with parallel channels of communication, or was this the primary way of exchanging information and bringing the word out?
Yeah, that's a great question. Did everything just run together, or did it finally take over?
Yeah.
I'll share a fun story. I was sitting in the office of a fellow named Morrow Walker, who was the global vice president of engineering. And he was a fellow that got engineering development reports from all over the world. And at that point, Motorola had just implemented email and attachments. Some of you are too young to remember the years before email. And so I was in his office to have a conversation. He said, I got to take care of something. And sitting on his desk were 2 4-inch binders with the reports from one organization in Florida. So he calls up this guy and he says, Don, you remember when I told you I wanted to get this stuff online or digitally? Listen. And so he picks up both binders and he drops them into the wastebasket with a horrible crash and crunch, and then he hangs up the phone. So in that particular culture in Motorola, some technology adoptions were forced, and some technology adoptions were more gradual. And some are led by certain functions and not others. Much to my great surprise, sales and marketing was among the first to use these tools, but also research and development. And research and development, you might think, are the people that hide in the basement and do inventions and they don't talk to anybody. Well, in fact, the Motorola Labs function was highly decentralized and highly divided and would have offices as small as 2 to 4 people in some country. And they had a thirst and a great need to collaborate more than they could do on teleconferences or email. And I don't know about you, but if you've ever been on a teleconference in Asia with people in America or in Europe from people in America, they're impossible to understand. The phones are not good, people talk too fast, they talk over each other, and you really can't get anything out of a meeting. And this is really not a good way to collaborate or share information. So the social media tools gradually took over from the more traditional methods.
Okay.
Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Other questions?
I have a question. Is there any kind of demographic, like age-wise distribution that you have find out people's adoption to these social media things?
Demographics in terms of culture, gender, function, or job title. Is that what you're looking for?
From culture, gender, and function.
Maybe also age.
Age.
Oh, age. I don't have good numbers from Motorola. I do have good numbers from CAP and from Baxter. This particular implementation, Motorola at this time was pretty well stratified in the sense that it had both aged, middle-aged, and young populations, and in the engineering function in particular, a lot of young people. So my best scientific guess is that there wasn't a clear demographic difference across the populations in terms of adoption. I was much surprised at how quickly senior leaders, by definition being older, adopted these tools for their own business purposes. And senior R&D leaders same thing. So don't think that this happened to be a consensus. And others, if you understand that. So, there's some additional questions? It's okay if this is two-way. It really is. Okay, next slide. All right, this is the first case that I will have of the use of social media for learning. And this is a story about the development of Agile software methods in Motorola. For those of you who are not technical experts, software development has had a transformation recently with the implementation of Agile software development methods. This is an incremental method. It's a team sport, and it has specific ways of incrementally coding and displaying something to clients, getting their input on an incremental basis. And it means that the fully formalized requirements document is dead, and we're going to have several conversations and continually evolve software rather than try and do it all perfectly from the front end. And this has led to some significant improvements in software development and in customer satisfaction. So where did this start at Motorola? Well, some years ago, there was a group that tried out the Agile methodology on a small project, a group of about 20 guys and some women. And they tried this out and found they had some spectacular results, both in quality and cycle time. So they presented this at an engineering meeting, a global engineering meeting for the business function. And of course, the vice president of engineering for that group looked around the room and said, "Why aren't the rest of you doing this?" That was the culture of Motorola. And so he said to people, "Okay, well, you and the group that's tried it out, you share your information, your methods with the other software development groups, and let's see what happens." So 1 year later, they had this same engineering meeting again, and the vice president had the software teams come up and asked them, "Are you using Agile methods?" And they said no. And he said, "What happened?" So he looks at the team that originally started and said, "Did you share them and share the methods?" And the team said, "Sure, we had teleconferences and emails and we sent attachments." And he looked at the software groups and said, "Did you get them?" And they said, "Yeah, we didn't really understand it very well and we were busy, so we didn't go further and implement it." So he said, "Well, what are we going to do about this?" Well, one of the ladies on my Global Knowledge Community Resource Office team, Nina Fazio, raised her hand in the meeting and said, "Why don't we try asynchronous collaboration?" Of course, nobody knew what that meant, but they thought it was probably the only path forward for this. So Nina and I set up something called an Agile Software Knowledge Community. This is what it looked like. And I think this might be a little small for you to see, but first of all, you'll notice that there's an introduction to the Agile software methodology. On the upper right are the key team members who had implemented Agile at Motorola and their email addresses. You can get them. Below that are Agile practices and principles. I don't know if you can see that. There's the Agile Manifesto, which is the worldwide document on how you do Agile. Underneath that were e-learning programs that were developed by the people in this knowledge community about the chapters in the Agile methodology, the Agile Manifesto. And then you see a blog. There's an entry from January 6th on Agile, Scrum, and QA, and that blog continued. Here's some more blog entries. And you'll also see there's the Agile Metrics training that's down there. And then there are sub-communities about different areas of Agile. All right, so this was set up after that second engineering meeting. 90 days later, actually 110 days later, 110 days later, the Agile software methodology had been implemented on key projects across this business and in all 4 other business units at Motorola. A whole year without it being implemented using traditional methods, and 110 days across the entire company using this community. Okay, so why was that important? Let's look. For those of you who are not familiar with Agile, Agile gives you about a 2 to 4x productivity improvement right off the top. 2 to 4x. Imagine if you're working in industry and you all of a sudden have 3 more people to help you do your job. Would that be nice? All right, so that's 4x. In addition, the methodology reduces the error rate in coding by about 2x. So what does this mean? A 50% defect density reduction? It means another 2x. Agile gives you an 8x software productivity improvement. I'll let that sink in for a minute. So in 110 days, we were able to get an 8x software productivity improvement in a technology company. That was the learning. The business impact was, for the first time in its history, Motorola released an entire family of cell phones under time and under budget for its entire history, the first time. So that's the business impact. What questions do you have about that? So engineers learning a brand new methodology only from a social media tool improved productivity 8x and released products on time and on budget.
I guess I have a question about that.
Yes.
How much, I'm not looking for a number, but what's your sense of how much of that information was more generic Agile methodology versus the Motorola way of doing Agile?
Yes. Good question. Excellent question. There's the generic and then there's real life. All right, what happened in this particular community was there was the generic Agile Manifesto and the e-learning about what the chapters in the Agile Manifesto meant and how you would actually implement it, and those were actually pretty detailed. It was both process and process step training. The reality of it was the blog. So what we asked people to do as they implemented Agile, to post in the blog how they actually implemented it on various projects. And so that was the real expertise sharing. And an interesting thing happened there. I think it was late on Friday afternoon one week, the IT person who managed the tool called me on the phone and said, "Have you been to the Agile blog today?" And I said, "No, I hadn't been there today." And he says, "Why don't you take a look?" So I went to the community and I looked in the blog, and someone had posted a flaming indictment of a key step in Agile methodology called Scrum. And Scrum is a step in Agile where if you run into a coding problem or you find something is going wrong and you can't find it, you call a Scrum, or you can, that's one of the reasons you can call it, and people around you come over to help you look for the problem. This is team-based problem solving in real time. Well, this happened to be a person who hated that kind of social interaction, and he flamed it badly in the blog. So the IT person said, "Should we take this down?" And I said, "No, let's see what happens." So we waited. Monday morning at 9 o'clock, we went back and looked at the blog, and there were 19 postings from other software engineers saying, "Oh, really? Are you having trouble with Scrum? You know, maybe you could come over when I have one and see how I deal with it, you know, because, yeah, it's different, but, you know," and they all basically were trying to help the person get through this and understand how this could be helpful and how it solves problems. So this self-correcting nature of the blog around this particular topic was a feature that we saw over and over again in these communities. They were self-correcting. Does that help?
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, here's my second case. And again, this has to do with engineering. I'm sorry if this is getting redundant, but this is where I worked at Motorola. We, for many years, more than 20, had conducted something called the Motorola Engineering Symposium. It was a typical kind of engineering conference. There was a hotel, there were sessions, there was lunch and dinner. And so there were about 1,100 people in 2007. Greg Immelt from GE came and spoke as a key speaker. Lots of things were going on. And about 200 papers were presented. It cost Motorola $1.4 million. And Greg Brown, who's still president of Motorola Solutions, said, "We're shutting this down, it's too expensive, and anybody who tries to hold an engineering symposium, I will personally fire." That's a quote. So I had been a member of the Rebel Alliance for some time, and I went to the vice president of engineering, and I said, "I can hold a global symposium for you at no cost." And he said, "Send me a proposal." So my good friend Nina and I sent him this proposal. Instead of using sessions at a hotel, we'll create sub-communities in a symposium knowledge community. One sub-community per track. Session chairs will become sub-community leads, and they will do the call for papers, and they will form a team to judge the papers and select papers for presentation. We will pick a week in September where people can present their papers in place using WebEx. So those of you looking for virtual learning, and they would be recorded. And the links to those recordings would be posted in the sub-community. So there were about 227 papers, about the same number of papers that we had in the face-to-face symposium. There were 12 countries represented. In the past, we might have maybe 20, 30 people from other countries out of 1,100. In this case, we had many more. So this was nice. You could stay in your time zone and in your facility. And when you woke up, you could go to work, and there would be presentation recording links from people around the world who presented on your topic of interest. And you could listen to those, and you could listen to the Q&A, and you would have the email of the person who presented if you wanted to follow up. So let's take a look at that. Here's where the people lived that participated in this first virtual engineering symposium. My favorite is the one that's just above the little boy, the small island off the southeast coast of India. People know what island that is? Sri Lanka. Yeah, Sri Lanka. In Colombo, on Sri Lanka, we had a software development crew of 25 people. 24 of those people presented in the virtual engineering symposium for the first time ever. So you can imagine how they felt having the opportunity to put their particular best practice engineering examples up in front of global Motorola while sitting in Colombo in Sri Lanka. That was enormously good for them, both professionally and personally. This is what the community looked like. The funny equation at the top was the equation that people's presentations had to satisfy. It was about engineering productivity. There was a description of the community and the symposium. And up on the left, you can see the sub-communities link. The sub-communities link basically shows you that there was a community for each topic. There were about 14 topics in this particular symposium. And each one had a community lead, call for papers, etc. So here were the results. I'll let you look through those. By any measure, these were spectacular results. We had more than twice the number of participants. We had more countries participating than ever before, about the same number of papers. The survey results said that 95% said they would do this again. We were somewhat worried. We knew that engineers were at least somewhat social species, and they really enjoyed getting together face-to-face and talking over lunch or in the hallways about what they had been doing. And so we weren't sure this would be as good as a face-to-face symposium, and we found out 95% of the people said they wanted to do this again. My favorite number is the one at the very bottom. Of course, these communities were set up for the Virtual Engineering Symposium, and each sub-community was on a special topic, audio engineering or electrical engineering. 120 days after the week in September, the number of individual or unique IP visits to those sub-communities exceeded the number of people that participated in the symposium, meaning that each of those sub-communities had become an ongoing collaboration site for people on that topic worldwide. Of all the outcomes of this symposium, that was the one that was most impressive to me. So, I don't have a slide on the symposium that followed this one, but I had left Motorola at that time, but I can tell you what the numbers were. The second year that this ran, there were 6,000 global participants. There were participated, and we got the same metrics on the symposium that we got in the first try. So what kind of business results did we have from this? I'll give you one example. There were literally hundreds of examples like this. In the country of Malaysia, there is an island called Penang, and there's an engineering development group for Motorola on Penang Island. And that group had on their own developed a methodology for essentially testing an engineering schematic in software to get results identical to building that particular product and testing it. So think about this for a minute. It's sort of like you can taste the cake recipe before you ever make the cake. That would be really cool, right? So this was a huge productivity improvement because this work could be done by an individual by themselves, whereas to build a first article PC board and test it with all of the different equipment would take 4 or 5 people to do. So here, from an HR perspective, is a 75% productivity improvement. From a methodology and a internally written application that could be shared around the world by sending the file Friday and people could be using it on Monday. That was one example of what happened in the symposium that illustrates the business impact of doing this entire piece, having this entire set of engineering learning happen entirely through social media. What questions do you have? Okay. As you were told, I left Motorola and I went to work at a place called the College of American Pathologists. This is a continuing medical education organization. And these are the medical doctors who chose to do pathology, which means they wanted to sit in the basement and look at a microscope. And there was a need to have them share information about new methodologies around cancer treatments and testing for that, and also digital microscopy to replace glass slides, which was their main library of information. And so we put together continuing medical education on those topics, and we basically set up portal-based entry to communities. We tried 6 communities, and we ended up having poor results. So we did an analysis of this and interviewed some of the pathologists and some other people in the medical organization, and we found out something interesting. So what do you think might happen if you tried to get people to collaborate in a community if you found out that 70% of them were contractors to hospitals and we're competing with each other for pathology business. Does that make sense, that they might not want to share too much about their best practices? Yeah. So one of the things that's critical to know about your group that you're trying to put together in a knowledge community is whether they have a need to collaborate or not. Social media tools are about collaboration between people. And if there isn't a strong need for them, or there are huge barriers for them to collaborate with each other and share best practice information or learn, then the community won't work. And that's what we learned. Also, to the person who asked about demographics, most of these pathologists were more than 50 years old. Most of them were responsible for their own business. And this was just simply not something that they saw would help them. I promised to tell you about Cerner Healthcare. Does anybody know who Cerner is? Have you heard of these people? You will if you're in HR. They're the 800-pound gorilla in healthcare IT. They're the ones setting up patient information systems and hospital information systems around the United States. They are the largest. They're headquartered in Kansas City. I had a chance to work with the person who was head of IT and learning for Cerner. It makes sense that learning and IT were put together because what Cerner put in place were IT systems. And so they had to be sure that the learning about that new IT system was tied into it really well. So the fellow who headed this up was with me at a Chief Learning Officer Symposium. And he told this story. He had a call from the Cerner corporate lawyer. This is an old crusty guy who was responsible for keeping Cerner out of courts. And he had been called on by the board to present the following Tuesday on how Cerner was protecting patient information and Cerner technology when it did training at people's hospitals. Well, the fellow that was heading this up said, okay, well, we'll see what we have available. Why don't you send out a notice on the company's social media network? And the guy said, what? What's that? So Bob went up and he sat with him and he said, I'll show you. So he got him an account and he had him construct his message and send it out on the social media system. And the guy said, that's not going to do anything. I need this by Tuesday. And Bob says, you know, cool your horses here. Let's talk about what you're really concerned about and see if anything comes back. So they talked for 5 or 10 minutes, and pretty soon there's this bong on this legal VP's computer, and he ignores it. And Bob says, maybe you should check what that is. It might be a response. The guy grumbles and looks at it, and sure enough, there's an email to him with an attachment. So he opens it up, and here's a 32-slide presentation with all of the risks outlined, all of the risk mediations outlined, and the specific steps Cerner Learning and Cerner IT are taking to prevent the release of patient information and protect Cerner and patient information during training done at a client facility. Exactly what he needed to have. So Bob says, gee, that's great, you got your answer. Who's it from? The guy says, I don't know, I don't care. I have it. Real nice guy. He would have had lots of conversations with HR people over the years. So Bob said, well, humor me, I'd like to know where it came from since it answers my question too. So the guy says, oh, it's this person. So they together looked this up on the HR system at Cerner. And guess what they found? The person who had sent this slide deck to Cerner's VP of Law was a 23-year-old female who had been with the company about 90 days and had taken it on herself to answer this question for the learning organization, and had put together this slide about 2 weeks before. So I'd like to let that sink in for a minute. Are these two people who would have ever seen each other, talked to each other, had lunch together in Cerner? No. And for women in the organization, what does this mean?
Visibility.
This social media tool is one way to level the playing field in an organization. If you have people who are able to answer requests from somebody they've never met, provide a solution, that some of the social barriers that normally existed within the organization are not necessary or not respected in this case. Do you think that might help the business move forward in a new way. And this accrues to people who might be in minority classifications, who might be people shy to otherwise engage, who through social media might be able to share answers, best practice, solve problems. This was a riveting story. When Bob got through delivering this story, auditorium filled with 700 people was dead silent for about 3 minutes. Most of you are in human resources, right?
Yes.
All right. So imagine what happened when I talked to the vice president of HR at Motorola about knowledge communities in her staff meeting. And I said, one of your business problems is having people around the world collaborate on HR problems and HR policies in any kind of real time. It's almost impossible. And knowledge communities offer asynchronous communication possibilities and many more tools for you to survey that group, collaborate with that group, look at implementation differences between sites. So why don't we do this? And her comment was, well, how do we protect against misuse of this bad information or wrong information or other things? And I said, well, do you have policies protecting Motorola against that kind of thing for written communication and email? She said, of course. I said, is there a reason why you think those policies wouldn't apply to social media? So she thought about that for a couple of minutes, and she said, turned to her aide or her director and said, okay, you work with Art and set up 16 communities for our key HR practice areas around the world. So that was an example of a single concern or consideration roadblocking the business implementation of something that would make HR much more collaborative and much more efficient worldwide. It was a concern about information security or information misuse that possibly might need new policy decisions, new rules, and that sort of thing, when in fact the existing rules in the company applied to this particular media. And that's something you can take with you to your company. There isn't a need in most companies to go beyond this existing policy if you implement a social media tool. And if you wander on down to the IT vice president's suite and have a conversation with them, they can be your backup for this because they deal with that same thing every day. Okay, we're getting close to the end here. Baxter Healthcare. Since we've had several examples here, I'll just say that Baxter is late to the game. They implemented SharePoint in 2011 and implemented a community tool set out of SharePoint called Spark. There are about 2,500 Spark communities and about 250 functional ones, very similar to what we found at Motorola. Some corporate, some functional. A lot of the organizations that are playing in this space are quality, manufacturing, engineering, and sales. They're mostly phase 1 communities. There are a handful of phase 2. And the team that's implementing the communities at Baxter is working very hard to migrate existing communities from phase 1 to phase 2, because that's where the business value is. As we did at Motorola, we are implementing at Baxter community leader training. This is extremely important. You have to identify the passionate expert for each of your communities and have that person essentially be responsible for the community and its ongoing goal. The guidelines in there cover things like we talked about earlier, that every person entering a community has to make a contribution. It has to be recognized by community members as valuable and built on. There's no use telling you that there's anything more seductive than being wanted. So if you're wanted in the community, you'll come back. And then the ongoing management of the community to ensure that the community members and the community leads are up to date on what the value of the community is, both to them and the other members and to the business. There is more communication involved in this ongoing vision and mission for the community than you might imagine, and community leaders are responsible for that. And they do need training. This is not an instinctive role for a lot of people in functional areas. There are also key leadership messages that are coming out from the C-suite at Baxter. There's a C-suite designated team that is implementing Spark. The Spark link is on the company portal inside the internal portal. And there's a wide variety of recorded training and e-learning available for how to implement communities and manage communities that's available. So all the resources are there. There are some communities at Baxter that have more than 250 members globally that collaborate on a regular basis. And we've just started one for the learning and development functions worldwide. It has a corporate HR VP as the sponsor and 2 key learning professionals, one in Australia and one in the US. One of them is me. And we will be implementing that in March as the Spark community is implemented by IT. So what questions do you have at this point? What did I not address that some of you had questions about? I know virtual learning is one of them.
I
Yes.
just want to know your opinion because when you talk about the College of American Pathologists, that they don't want to share their good best practice because they thought each other was competitor, right?
Yes. It turns out that it's not true they don't want to collaborate. A pathologist will often run into slides of samples taken from a person who's ill, and they really haven't seen it before, or they're not sure of what the diagnosis is. And so what they will do is they will do one of 2 things. They will call up someone they trust who is not in direct competition with them, and they will get their opinion on it. And they might do that with 2 or 3 people. And they will put the slide away and they'll think about the advice they were given, and some days later they'll make a decision. In some cases they will send the slide to their colleague and have them look at it on their microscope. These people have a lot of fun with money. A lot of them have microscopes in their office that cost more than a Tesla race car. So this is a pretty high-zoot deal. But any place where they're in direct competition with each other, they do not share.
Yes, because I read several articles talk about they know it must be good to share, but kind of they're afraid of getting behind because they're sharing with the competitors,
yes.
Especially when they have a community of practice in the one company. So another case is it's very, I don't remember the exact name, but it's a very famous online community in nursing. So it's around the nation in US. It's one of the biggest online community in nurses. So they are sharing a lot because they didn't think each other is competitor. They just want to help them to be better because they're in the same field and they are not in the same hospitals.
Yes.
But I think it's very important to share the knowledge within the one organization because in this way they can share a better way. They can share knowledge and they can find out best way to improve their productivity. But I think it's true they don't want to share because they want to promote. They don't want to be fired. So, in your opinion, how to cope up with this kind of problem? How can we deal with it?
Well, that's a fascinating question because it addresses a problem that we thought we had because we were misinterpreting what we were seeing. First of all, why would any expert want to share their expertise in a community? Why would they? Why should they? They might think it's job security to keep their expert knowledge to themselves, so they're always the go-to person. So we decided we'd investigate that. And we found that true experts don't do that. True experts share their expert knowledge regularly because they're always gaining more expertise on Monday morning. They're always smarter on Monday than they were on Friday. So it's okay if they share their knowledge on Friday because they're continuing to develop their knowledge on a regular basis. And so it's not a threat to them that somebody knows what they used to know. You have a large band of people in the middle who think they're experts and really aren't, and for that reason are afraid to share their expertise because all of a sudden they won't be special anymore. And what they really need to do is adopt and continue to be an expert rather than a past expert. And then in the lower tier, there's a group of people who aspire to be experts and aren't there yet. These could be new people, novices, or people who just never had the opportunity to grow. And a community will raise all boats. Those people will get better. They may never become experts or even want to be experts, but because of the information available to them in the community, they will get better. And we didn't really understand that until we looked into communities and experts.
So, one more question. How can you define the real experts? Or because I just wonder, how can we know they're real expert or just pretend they're experts?
That's pretty easy. You're in HR. You already know how to go into an organization and find out who the go-to people are. You ask, who are the people that everybody goes to when they have a problem? And there'll be a handful of people, or maybe only one person, that everybody in that function goes to if they have a problem they can't solve or something they've never seen before. And they won't go to the whole organization. They'll go to one or two people who have reliably, in the past, had the expertise to answer their problem. And that's true in every function and in every organization. There's usually only one or two people. I had a heartbreaking experience at Motorola one day when I was up in Arlington Heights at one of their facilities. I was at lunch waiting for a meeting to start at 1 o'clock, and there was a group of about 8 people in engineering sitting around the table, and one of them says, "You know, they let Doug go," and the whole table went groan, and people started saying, "Who are we going to talk to about our problems?" They had let the expert go. Very big mistake for the corporation. All right, we have just a little bit of time left. I wanted to share with you what I think the implications of social media are for learning and corporations in general. This is the migration I see us going through in the very near future. Corporate training will become very distributed and will wind up in knowledge communities where the expertise actually exists. Rather than being internally designed by a learning organization, it will be community created. To be fair, the community leads and the community experts may call upon the learning organization to help them develop it, but it will be developed in the community and stored in the community. Learning management systems will migrate to the business libraries in the communities. Training coordinators will become community leaders or members who provide access to the learning and the expertise in that community. It will not be centralized in an LMS, it will be in communities. So, a question for you to consider is, what is our horizon? How do we know what expertise is going to be needed today and in the future? How can we anticipate what might be important? And how will the competitive landscape change as the pool of skilled talent shifts in some ways? All right, well, here's an example. This is a fellow named Danny Hillis. I brought him into Motorola to talk about innovation. And he told a story about going to New College in Oxford on a tour. Well, New College was built in 1386, and while he was on his tour, he learned from the docent that in 1856, some 500 years later, the oak beams that held up the slate ceilings in New College had deteriorated and had to be replaced. And so Danny thought, where in the world did they get oak beams 40 feet long and 24 inches in diameter to hold up a ceiling in 1856? So who knows what oak trees were being used for in England in 1856? Anybody? I know it's a stretch. What was England's role in history in 1856? What were they known for?
Slavery.
Say again?
Slavery.
Well, that,
And
something else that they used oak for.
They built ships.
Yes, their ships. They were known for their navy. All right, so if you have a military high priority to cut down oak trees and make ships out of them, where in the world are you going to get replacement beams in 1856? All right, so the docent tells him that they hunted around trying to figure out how they were going to replace these beams, and they finally went to talk to the alpinist at Oxford. This is a guy with a little felt hat and a pipe. You know. And they asked him, where in the world do you think we could get oak to replace these beams? And the alpinist said, well, there's a forest of oak in southwest England that was planted in 1386. to provide replacement beams for the new college buildings. So I'll let that sink in for a minute. So they were planning for something to be needed 500 years in the future, and they planted it and made it available. So I had two questions for Danny. I said, first of all, how did the knowledge that that oak forest was reserved for new college ceiling beams, how did that get carried forward for 500 years? That's a question for us and our companies. Just imagine for a moment that the company you're in may in fact survive for 500 years. What information and learning would be necessary to preserve over that period of time in a community or any other way? The second one was, why in the world would they use oak in 1856 when steel had been invented and you could make a steel beam that would replace the oak in that ceiling? And he said, well, it's England, you know, and they like to keep everything the same. All right. Well, I'll open it for questions for the amount of time we have left. Back to you, Jessica.
All right. Any questions? Exchange information? Well, I guess any other questions? No? Well, thank you so much. I think for this very informative talk on the social media industry. Thank you very much.